Welcome to Spectral Shadows, where the darkness whispers and the unseen lurks. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because horror feels different at night, especially when you're alone. Those who love their mother, like, share, and comment. Subscribe, if you dare. Now turn off the lights, and let's begin. Story number 1. Me and Jane were best friends from the start. I moved to Texas when I was 7 years old and was scared to death of meeting new people. The first day of class, I sat quietly in the corner, playing with Barbies while others ran around and played with their friends. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see Jane standing there holding her own doll. We have been friends ever since. Jane always was in the mood for adventures, so we spent most of our childhood roaming through forests and across town. Fast forward 10 years, and we just finished our junior year of high school. Summer was always fun because we could just hang out every day. Jane had a car and her license, so we could go anywhere we wanted. We had been on so many adventures. There was almost nothing left for us to do in this run-down town. We were sitting on her couch, watching TV, like we usually did, when she looked over at me, and a smirk appeared across her face. "What?" I asked, figuring she farted or something stupid. "I want to go on an adventure," Jane exclaimed, turning off the TV. I rolled my eyes and sighed deeply. Where would we even go? "Let's go to Devil's Creek," she said, her smirk growing to a wide grin. Devil's Creek got its name around 10 years ago when a young boy disappeared there. His parents said they had gotten into a fight at a nearby campground, and he had stormed off. Rescue teams searched and searched, but they were never able to find him. "Why would we do that?" I asked, not really wanting to brave the July sun. "We've never been. Don't you want to do something fun?" "Going to a creek in the middle of the woods is not my definition of fun." She rolled her eyes and began to stand up. "Oh, hush." And with that, I knew we were going. I followed her out to her '99 Civic and climbed in the passenger seat. It took a few tries, but she started it up and off we went towards Devil's Creek. The ride took about 15 minutes and we chatted along the way. Jane was talking to this huge prick named Robbie and was telling me how in love she was with him. I was almost positive he was sleeping with Claire Davids, but I just kept it to myself. I didn't want to ruin Jane's happiness. We parked the car along the side of the road and started the trek into the woods. I knew from Google Maps that it took around 3 hours of hiking to get to the creek. I was not looking forward to it, as it was already 90 degrees and wasn't even noon yet. We had been walking for around 2 hours when Jane wanted to take a quick rest on a rock, to take a drink and tie her shoe. She sat down and started pulling the water bottle from her bag when I heard leaves rustle behind us. I turned quickly, but saw nothing there. The weird part was that the woods were pretty dense, so I would have heard something run away. I told Jane to hurry up, and we continued along the path towards the creek. I felt like we were being watched the whole way there. I felt like an antelope being stalked by a hungry lion, and I hated every step I took further into the woods. Finally, we reached the creek and noticed there were some stumps set around what looked like an old campfire. We each took a seat looking across the creek to the other side of the woods. It was a beautiful scene to take in. I closed my eyes as a gentle breeze started to pick up. "Michaela," Jane said softly. "Yes?" I responded without opening my eyes. "Look how pretty the water is," she replied. I could detect a hint of something weird in her voice. I opened my eyes and looked down at the creek. Reflecting on the water was Jane and I's faces, but we weren't the only ones. Reflected between our faces was a horribly disfigured man. I knew that he was standing right behind us. Unsure what to do, I turned to face him. I took a long look over him, soaking in every detail I could. He was grinning widely as he looked back at me, studying me as I was him. He looked to be around our age and had long brown hair that was matted with dirt and dead leaves. He had a huge scar that ran down half his face. It looked like his head didn't line up correctly. Half of his face was lower than the other half, and his smile was crooked. He had on a t-shirt that was much too small and riddled with holes. It barely even covered anything. He had a blanket tied around his waist that was riddled with what looked to be dried blood and dirt. Jane finally got brave enough to turn around with me, and we both slowly stood up. As we did, the man let out a loud scream, and we just took off as fast as we could. I could hear sticks breaking behind us as he chased after us through the woods. There was no way we could realistically keep this pace until we were out of the forest. I knew we were in trouble. I had an idea, but I wasn't sure it would work. He didn't seem bothered when I had been looking at him earlier. Maybe he was just as afraid of us as we were of him. I suddenly stopped running and turned on my heels. "Hey!" I yelled as loud as I could. The man and Jane both stopped dead in their tracks. "What the fuck are you doing?" Jane asked me in a hushed whisper. I shushed her and began walking towards the man. As I got closer, I noticed him shaking, and he took a few steps back. "I think he's scared of us." "Scared?" Jane said angrily. "If he's scared, then why did he chase us like a fucking lunatic?" I looked up at the man, and his eyes met mine, because he didn't want us to get away. The man looked at me and smiled again. "Help, please," he said softly. His voice was hoarse and cracked, like he hadn't spoken in years. Jane walked over beside me and looked over the man again. "How do we know he's not some fucking psycho who's going to murder us?" The man shook his head. He pointed to himself. "Will." "Will what?" Jane asked, obviously annoyed. "I am Will," he said again. I suddenly remembered the story of his Devil's Creek got its name. The little boy that had disappeared. His name was William Matthias. He's the boy that was lost here. I said softly, almost in utter disbelief. "There is no fucking way. That kid is long dead," Jane replied, in the usual bitchy tone she used when she didn't believe me. The man shook his head at Jane, as if to tell her she was wrong. "Help," he repeated again. We took Will through the woods with us and back to the car. We immediately drove him to the hospital. I could tell by her stiff posture and tight grip that Jane was very uncomfortable with the whole situation. When we arrived, we checked him in as John Doe, but I told the nurse that he had told me his name was Will. Jane and I sat in the waiting room for about an hour before two distressed-looking adults came rushing through the door. They looked to be in their 50s or 60s, and the woman was crying while her husband comforted her gently. A doctor came out to greet them, and I heard him say Will's full name. I immediately stood up and walked over to them. "Are you Will's parents?" I asked softly. The woman looked over at me and wiped her eyes. "Yes, who are you?" The doctor answered for me. "This is one of the young ladies who found your son." I saw a glimpse of a strange emotion in the woman's eye before she closed them again to resume crying. "Oh, thank you so much," she said, throwing her arms around me. Will's father stood smugly behind her as she continued to hold me in a tight embrace. When she finally let go, I asked if I could see Will again, and she agreed. Jane had to head home, so I let her go and told her that I could get my mom to pick me up later that day. I followed his parents into the room and watched as they hugged and kissed all over him. He had been bathed and had a haircut, almost resembling a current human being instead of some kind of caveman. Will looked over at me while this was going on with a strange expression. It almost looked like fear. The doctor was with us as well, and began explaining that it seemed Will had perhaps fell and hit his head very hard in the past. He never learned past age 9, when he ran away. He suffered some pretty severe bleeding from it, but luckily no lasting damage. His memory was intact. I instantly saw a switch go off inside both of his parents' head. His mother looked up at me with a fake smile. Could we have a moment alone with our son? The doctor began to leave the room, but my gut told me something was wrong here. "No," I said sternly. "Excuse me?" His mother replied, clearly agitated at this point. The doctor stopped in his tracks and looked back at the four of us. Will finally spoke again. What he said will be engraved into my memory forever. They did it. The police came and arrested Will's parents soon after that. It turns out, all those years ago, Will had not run away. His parents and him had been out camping when they began to argue. When things began to escalate, Will's mother had begun to beat him with a rock. They thought they had killed him when they disposed of his body in a nearby cave. Tall brush had hidden it well from search teams. But eventually Will woke up. He climbed out of the cave and had been living in the woods ever since. The doctors say it is a true miracle he was able to survive, especially with his extensive head injuries. Will is doing much better now and is learning new things every day. And as for me and Jane, we just visited Devil's Creek again last week, although we don't call it Devil's Creek anymore. The only devils involved were locked away in high-security prisons halfway across the country. We started traveling there every week with our new friend, Will. It suddenly didn't seem so scary, and Will showed us some awesome places beyond the creek as well. When your friend, Jane, suggests an adventure, you might just want to take her up on it. Story number 2. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird and just totally out of character for her, like I said. but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m. and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of Oj in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face, staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it, not out of irritation but fear. For some reason at that moment I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her, or even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what fuck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again. From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that?" I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time. So I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been, seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that, the sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all, had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile, and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking, and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home, and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was fucking terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house, and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck, Lynn? I snapped. This shit is getting really fucking annoying. I waited for her to apologize, or to call me a jerk. But instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just fucking stop it," I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a fucking lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could, all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold, maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me, I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. Now, she didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from her place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife, Rebecca, hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled. Like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation. But if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours, like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully, I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry, because it's not my place. But is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know, She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben. But she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed. She said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her. I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has. To be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work. She said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. "No. She just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep," she said, as she washed the dishes. "That's all? She didn't say anything else?" I asked. "No. She looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her." I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I swore an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believed she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed. But what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't. A very warm person, and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away, so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. "Yes," she answered, already sounding irritated. "Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment." "What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said, coolly. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something." I was quickly interrupted. "It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is that you want from me?" she asked. I could almost see her standing, there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. "I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues," I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind," she said. But I cut her off before she could get rid of me. "Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well," I said, my frustration evident in my voice. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved." I don't know what you expect of me." She snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. "Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn." I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. "Marianne, what's were?" I started. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. "Seek professional help." She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else, someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet. But I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully, they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. "Maybe for YouTube?" Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets, like he was going on a fucking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here? Shit." Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly, quiet, and dark, despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the fuck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something?" Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction. But fuck me, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." "All right." I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. "Who the fuck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that?" Chris mumbled. "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a fucking exorcist," he said. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any." His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving, to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements, as if she were nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder, and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head, slightly, and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards, down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast, scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run, go," I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her, and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me. Still on the line with 911, I watched the rear-view mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search. But of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow, I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs, but now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you," and a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. Story number 3. I don't like spiders. I don't like it when they bunch themselves up so their legs look like tangled wires. And I don't like it when they spread themselves out like the radial spokes on a wheel. It was bad luck that when I met my wife, we discovered we were both scared of them. As the man, I kinda just wound up taking over spider-killing duty. At first, this meant squealing while trying to lob a shoe at one of them from a distance, but as the years went on, I kinda just got tired of the stress and anxiety. Fear is exhausting. So is the pageantry of it. Jumping up and shouting and lots of running around. Over time, I found myself having less and less of a fear reaction to them. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want one crawling on my face, but it wasn't like they had me running away in fear every time. Lily was never great with them either, but it wasn't what I'd call worthy of therapy. For the first 10 years I knew her, she was a fairly run-of-the-mill arachnophobe. Things only got bad after this one night, when we'd just come back in from an evening with friends. There'd been a storm outside, windy as hell. I remember putting the keys down on the table by the door, and when I looked back, she was pulling down the hood of her coat. She let out a sigh, ran her hands through her hair, and she looked a little puzzled by what she'd felt. When she lifted her hand, away there were thin black legs poking out from between her fingers. It took a second for her to react to what was all bunched up inside her cupped hand. Then she screamed and threw it onto the ground. I saw it for only a second. It was so fast. Then it was off and under the nearest door, and my number one concern became comforting my wife, who was having a full-blown panic attack. "Get it off, get it off, get it off," she screamed while slapping at her neck and hair. I hugged her tight, checked her hair, and then checked it again when she asked me to. Then she stripped her top off to make sure nothing else was clinging to her clothes before I took her into the kitchen and we had a cup of tea while she kept scratching at the back of her head. "Little fucker," she half cried, half laughed. "I can't believe it. Did you see it? It was huge." "One of the biggest yet," I said. Truthfully, I only had half-glimpsed memories of it scuttling away, but it had been big, large enough that a pint glass wouldn't have fit over its darting legs. Just seeing it had left me feeling anxious, but at the time I ignored my own discomfort. After all, I'd hardly been the real victim, and it got away. She cringed. "Oh, God. It's still in this house somewhere, isn't it?" I wanted to lie, but thought better of it. "Somewhere, yeah," I said. "But we'll spider-proof the bedroom tonight, and I'll go looking in the morning." "Thank you." She smiled mournfully. "Jesus, I just know I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight." She made me strip the bed before she got in it, and all night she kept flicking at her fringe and the hair on the back of her neck. I felt so bad for her. If that had been me, I can't say I would have reacted much better. Neither of us slept that well, but I was mostly just worried about her. When you love someone, it's tough to see them suffer. But it wasn't just that. One night, the second one was much the same. The third, fourth, and so on. It petered out a little in the second week, but then she saw a spider on some TV show, and the anxiety came back full force. Every night was the same. I had to strip the bed of everything, lift the mattress, and check for spiders. She even got rid of her bedside table so there'd be less hiding places for one. In the meantime, I was on hunting duty. In her own words, I had to find the bastard, or she'd never feel safe in that house again. It's funny, but in hindsight, I can't really say what I saw go scuttling under the doorway that first night, but I do know I didn't try all that hard to find it. I remember finding some webs under the living room sofa that were real odd. The fibers were thick, like the fake stuff they bring out on Halloween, and I had to peel them off the carpet like Velcro. I found a couple of these nests throughout the house, but I never mentioned them. One of them hit a hole in the floor that really should have alarmed me, but I just ignored it. I ignored a lot, actually. I found dead mice spun up in cocoons, and something bore a hole through one of the kitchen cupboards and filled it with silk. Nothing normal about that, but I just covered it up with some cans and moved on. A behavior I find hard to explain in hindsight. Maybe my attention was elsewhere. Lily wasn't in a great place, and she was slowly getting worse. She cried a lot, and any little thing that touched her skin would result in lots of panicked yelling. She couldn't eat a meal without slapping at her arms and neck every few seconds. Things got real bad when I came back one night to find her shaving her head. She told me she got tired of mistaking the feeling of her own hair for a spider. So, this was the simplest way to feel clean and safe. If you've ever lived with anyone who's had a breakdown, there's usually this moment where your heart sinks as you realize that what you're dealing with has transcended the norm. It's quite frightening, actually. Reminded me of when my Mum found a lump. It's a very isolating sort of fear. I remember lying awake in bed that night and just thinking about how I'd found Lily bent over the bath, shaver in hand, with a patchy head like that doll from Toy Story. When she looked over her shoulder at me, she smiled, and her eyes were so wide, I felt like I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. Have you ever missed someone while you still live with them? Made them coffee and breakfast and chatted about your day, but it's like nobody's there. Every day was the same. I'd tell her about work, and she'd tell me about how she'd scrubbed the bedroom top to bottom looking for spiders, or started pulling up the bathroom tiles to check for nests. At one point, I realized she'd taken a lot of time off work, but she wouldn't give me a straight answer, so I had to call her office. They wouldn't even answer my calls, which I had to take as a pretty bad sign. It came as a relief when she got sectioned. Everything came out all at once. She'd tried putting a hammer to one of the walls to find what was behind it, not realizing that it was just the neighbor's living room on the other side. I was at work during all this, but things clearly escalated pretty quickly, and the police arrived to find a partially bald woman screaming about spiders in the walls. By the time I got home, they'd already taken her to be assessed at the local hospital. I rushed to visit her, but in the meantime, I had to call her parents, and it was a relief because I wasn't alone anymore. Other people knew what was going on, and that made it a little easier for me to navigate. Until then, I'd been afraid to mention it to anyone. I guess I was a little embarrassed, or maybe just not sure what the etiquette was for discussing someone else's mental health. She was only gone about a night, not even 12 hours, really. The neighbors agreed not to press charges if I paid for all the repairs, and Lily got therapy. Lily's parents are quite well off, so they helped us out with that. They found this clinic that she stayed at for a couple of weeks. It specialized in exposure therapy, which really just means getting a person used to their phobia. Don't like water. Spend hours every day in a pool. Don't like moths. Step into a room with thousands of them. This is oversimplification, of course. It's a special program that involves gradual increases in the nature of the exposure. The first night she called me and told me they'd had her looking at pictures of a spider and talking about her experience. They were literally just cartoony drawings, but she told me she found it hard anyway. She cried, and I cried too. She was only a few hours' drive away, but I didn't want to be away from her, and everything had happened so suddenly. It was only 6 weeks between that night with the storm and her ending up in that clinic. But in that short period of time, I felt like the ground had fallen from beneath my feet. 2 weeks she was in there. I don't remember them well. There were phone calls every night. She was getting better, she told me, and the doctor confirmed as much. Hard going, for sure. They had to sedate her the day she graduated from cartoons to actual photos of spiders. Apparently she scratched an orderly up real bad. My time in the house was lonely. Little weird too, if I'm honest. I woke up at one point with cobwebs in my hair, and at some point I realized that I hadn't seen a spider in my home for a long time. Not even a little money spider. I briefly wondered about what the hell had been leaving cobwebs around the place, but never followed up on it. It's hard to get my thoughts straight. I do remember finding more dead mice, all webbed up in the back of that kitchen cupboard. One morning I came down to find a starling cocooned on the outside of the kitchen window. No sign of what did it thought. I just stared at it and sipped my coffee. Then I left for work, and when I came back it was gone. Probably not a good time to tell you I was diagnosed with a kind of dementia some time ago. I guess that's supposed to help make sense of things, right? I don't know. Doesn't feel like it makes sense to me. It's not like Alzheimer's. Runs in my family. They say the neurons of a human brain with Alzheimer's look like a cobweb that's had holes poked in it. That's a good way to describe how my mind feels to live inside. Thoughts travel along a given route and then just drop off. Lily's therapy progressed nicely, though. I remember that quite clearly. The phone calls and the sound of her voice, real vivid. Jesus, I missed her so bad during this time. I hate being overly sentimental, but it had been a tough and lonely 6 weeks. And hearing her sound increasingly happy and confident with each new phone call was like a shot of pure happiness right into my veins. I missed her, and I wanted her back. And when she told me, giggling with joy, that she'd held a little spider on day 10, I burst out crying right with her. I felt pride at her accomplishment, and I felt relief that things might be getting back on track for us, like the nightmare was finally going to be over. It wasn't so simple when I saw her in person. She came back looking like the war-wounded. I should say she looked beautiful, but I want to be honest. I smiled when I saw her, but it didn't reach my eyes because the woman who got into the car looked a lifetime apart from the woman who'd been living with me just a few months ago. She was thin as a rake, with ashy pallid skin and a shaved head that made her look like a matchstick. And her eyes, the look in them wasn't right. But she was smiling, so I swallowed the funny feeling I had in my stomach and pretended everything was okay. There was no work for her to go back to, and I managed to get some time off after speaking to my boss. It was just us, and that can be a weird feeling for a couple used to working 9 to 5. I was on edge. Didn't know what to expect. She smiled a lot, tried her best to reassure me, and I asked a lot about what therapy was like, and she told me it was fantastic. Showed me photos of her sitting next to big house spiders, some as wide as her palm. Had to fight back my own fear while looking at them. She told me that was day 13, but when I asked what happened on day 14, she said it was mostly just packing up and saying goodbye. There is a dark and uncomfortable truth to relationships, and it's that time only flows in one direction. My wife hadn't done anything wrong, and I didn't really feel any ill will towards her, but a distance had been placed between us. All the best will in the world couldn't undo it. She'd changed. Been changed, I guess. At the time I didn't know how to understand any of it, but I wasn't sure how to treat her. When I kissed her, it was on the cheek. When I held her, it was like hugging a female co-worker. I didn't know what my own feelings were, and I wouldn't until I found her one morning in the kitchen tapping away at a pint glass and giggling, like a toddler. It wasn't the light and airy laughter of the woman I was used to. It was more like the laughter of a bunch of kids egging on a fight or cheering on a nasty bully. She didn't speak when she looked at me. She just turned back to the glass and kept laughing flicking it gently with her fingers. When I walked around the table, I saw it under there. A very large house spider. I don't know what is normal for people around the world, but a UK house spider is big if its legs are wider than the palm of your hand. This thing was even bigger, with legs bundled up against the side of the glass, like spools of segmented wool, and seeing it made me jump way back. I realized I hadn't seen another spider since the night of the storm, and that thing all curled up with legs as thick as hairpins was a real shock to my system. I cried out, and my wife, she started howling with laughter. I mean, it was like a toddler discovering cartoons for the first time. Manic and weird, and just so fucking happy. But in a way that was a little alien, because I didn't understand the thoughts and feelings that went into that ear-splitting cackle, and it was all wrong coming from her. I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. She just laughed until something in her got tired, and she slowly stopped giggling, but she still didn't say anything, even after she'd gone quiet. In the end, it was me who broke the silence. I didn't have a clue what to say. The whole time she was staring at me with her patchy hair and gleeful, teary eyes, and I got so desperate to break the standoff that I stammered out the words. "He's a big one, ain't he?" Her face relaxed, her shoulders slumped. She slipped out of the crazy like it was only ever an outfit. "They'll get bigger," she said, and then she lifted the glass, snatched the spider up, and stuffed it into her mouth. I didn't see it, not fully, but I stood, frozen in terror, and watched the muscles in her badly shaved head tense and relax as her jaw worked away, crunching at those hardened legs. Jesus Christ. The sounds were bad enough, but when she was done, she looked over her shoulder at me and smiled, and her teeth were smeared green and black, with littles of bits of leg and chitin still stuck between the gums. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, but now I knew why I'd felt so different around her since she'd come back. I was afraid of her, like a kid around an abusive parent. I just didn't know what I was gonna get. There was always this energy in the room that had me on edge. I'd sit there watching TV, but I wasn't really watching. Couldn't have told you what was on half the time. Instead, every ounce of my being was focused on her. Every breath, every motion. When she got up to use the toilet, I watched her intensely to see what she was going to do. The fact that she rarely did anything except carry on as normal was all the more unsettling, because I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't stop remembering the way she'd laughed with that thing under the glass. Nights were bad. A lot of the time I'd wake and get the feeling she'd just been watching me. But she was usually fast asleep, or at least that's how it looked. Sometimes there were furtive movements like she'd just rolled over. I got used to it, thought it was probably just in my head. But then one night I woke up, and she was right there, face inches away from mine. I cried out, couldn't help it, shuffled backwards while trying to avoid touching her, and wound up falling off the bed. When I looked up from the floor, she had a completely blank expression. She was just looking at me like a cat watching a fly. "What are you doing?" I cried out, unable to stop the irritation from bleeding into my voice. She shrugged, just watching. Then she rolled over, like nothing had happened. That night, I slept on the sofa. She didn't ask why, didn't say a word as I grabbed my things and left the bedroom. I wasn't sure I would manage to fall asleep after that, but I did. And when I woke up, I had cobwebs in my hair. I was lucky if I slept more than a few hours. A night after that, it came fitfully, if at all. I woke up too many times to the feeling of something tickling my face and chest, a sensation like someone running a feather over me. every time I'd come to in a panic, but I never found anything except nearly invisible silk clinging to my skin. Life without sleep was difficult, and I struggled to hide my dislike for Lily. Over time, our habits and routines diverged even further apart. I stopped going upstairs almost entirely. Just didn't need to. I had work, and the sofa, and the kitchen, and the days when I came back and barely saw Lily at all were fine by me. I preferred being away from her, something that kind of broke my heart, if I'm honest. There were times I wanted to reach out, but looking at her gave me the funniest feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to change things, didn't want to get closer. If anything, I wanted to run away, and I don't mean that I wanted to flee my life and adult responsibilities in some abstract way. I mean, I felt a powerful urge to quite literally run away from her. It was horrible feeling that way about my wife, and just trying to understand those emotions was enough to give me a headache most days. I became real forgetful during this time, and it was a long time before I realized I'd forgotten to pay for the repairs to the wall. I think it slipped my mind. Emphasis on think, because I don't remember what I have and haven't forgotten. I just nailed some plywood over and left it. And 3 months later, one day, out of the blue, it occurred to me I should probably have done something more about it. I did find a toolkit in the kitchen that wasn't mine. I might have called someone, out for a quote. I don't know. But once I remembered that I'd never actually fixed the hole, I was filled with this shame and embarrassment, and I decided the best thing to do was to face it head on and go apologize to my neighbor. I never knew a lot about the guy. He was an older man who liked his football, had a nose like a tomato, and spent most nights in the pub. I knew he lived alone, though, and when I knocked his door and there was no answer, it wasn't too strange. At least it didn't seem out of the ordinary until I went back inside my house and heard footsteps on the other side of the wall. So I went back, and I knocked a couple more times, figuring he maybe hadn't heard me. But there was still no answer. I found this weird. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who'd avoid a neighbor he didn't like. He'd just open the door and tell you to fuck off. I went back and looked, but couldn't see anything through his windows. And all I could see looking through his letterbox was a gray sheet across the opening. When my fingers came away covered in a sticky thread, I had this terrible feeling in my stomach. I couldn't have possibly explained how, but I was convinced that Lily had done something. After all, it was him calling the police who'd gotten her into trouble. But it wasn't like I could kick his door down to check, and I wasn't going to go scrambling through any half-open windows. Fortunately, we shared a fence in the back garden. It was easy enough to jump, and from there I checked the windows on that side of the house. He'd left the kitchen blinds open, and at first what I saw baffled me. For a moment I wondered if he was decorating because everything inside was covered by a thin, translucent sheet. But I only had to pay close attention to realize that didn't make sense. When painting a ceiling, you don't throw tarps over half-drunk cups of coffee and plates of moldy food. And the material that covered everything was cloudy and made of thread, and obviously some kind of silk. It took a lot of effort to control the urge to just hop the fence back and pretend like I never saw a damn thing. But if he needed some kind of help, then I knew I had to at least try. I looked briefly at the stoop by the back door. There was a lighter on the ground where someone had dropped it. It was strangely conspicuous and made me think that whoever had left it there had done so in a hurry. Didn't make sense that someone would drop it there and not notice. Not unless they'd been otherwise occupied. I picked it up and winced when it came from the floor with a sticky tearing sound. It was covered in barely visible silk threads. God, I wanted that back door to be locked. Couldn't think of anything worse than having to push ahead, but I tried the handle and it went down. The door popped open with barely any effort, and I got a good look at how every last inch of that place was covered in pale cobwebs that got thicker and thicker as my eyes drifted deeper inside the house. I couldn't help but wonder if they were strong enough to trap a person. Was my neighbor in there somewhere? Somebody was. I knew that much from the sounds I'd heard, but I couldn't see him in the kitchen. I wanted to cry out for him, maybe even go marching into the house and look for myself, but the hallway out of the kitchen had been turned into a web-lined tunnel. No straight lines, just a dark, silky womb whose rounded funnel walls fluttered gently in the breeze. I stared intently into that darkness, trying my best to see if there was the shape of a man's corpse cocooned somewhere in the pale white silk. I leaned forward, my head and shoulders just moving past the door frame, when the blackness in the tunnel grew legs. Dark carapace and segmented limbs exploded towards me so fast, it was almost in the kitchen before my heart had time to skip a beat. And then it stopped, halfway into the room, standing perfectly still and brazen in the fading daylight. A bundle of legs the size of a horse. A real-life monster. I didn't move. Jesus Christ, it took me another minute just for my brain to process what I was looking at on a conscious level. My nervous system was quicker, sure. It was like a blanket of disgust, and terror was thrown over me. My stomach plunged to the floor. My skin crawled. My heart felt like it was going to explode. But my actual mind was blank. White noise and static. The creature was huge, so big its legs could just about fit in the hallway behind it, but in the kitchen with a little more room, those front limbs and mouthy feelers spread out like tendrils and gripped the doorway. It was ready to pounce on whatever had sent disturbances throughout its web. I've read that spiders can be a little like Venus fly traps. They won't always pounce on a single trigger. They need multiple hits. When I looked down at my feet, I saw that I'd taken just one step inside. But that was all it needed to be alerted. Now it had approached the initial alarm and, half-blind, it waited for another hint of something trapped inside its web. I had to wonder, would lifting my shoe count? Did I have a choice? I couldn't stay there. Looking at the damn thing was bringing me closer and closer to full-blown panic with every passing second. I had to do something, and I had to do it with some semblance of control. I slid my foot backwards. The spider didn't move. As soon as both feet were outside, I let go of the door handle and felt something sticky detach from my palm. It feels like an exaggeration to say that lightning moves slower. I'm not sure I have the words to describe how fast it was. I'm sure most of you have seen a nature documentary with one of those fish, or maybe even a trapdoor spider, and you thought, oh shit, that was quick. But this thing, maybe it was just because it was coming right at me. I've never seen anything like it except for when videos get edited. All of a sudden it was just there, and before I knew it, thick woolly paps were pinning me to the ground, and I was looking into a pink slit of a mouth framed by fangs as long as my forearms. They moved independent of each other, and something about the sight of all those wheel-spoke legs and segmented joints clumped together in its thorax sent my mind reeling. I said at the beginning of this that a lifetime of exposure had helped curb my arachnophobia, but there are limits. I blacked out. When I woke up, it was dark all around me. I didn't know it at the time, but the belly of the beast was my neighbor's former living room. It wasn't actually pitch black, but it did take a few terrifying minutes for my eyes to adjust well enough just to be able to see my own body stuck and wriggling beneath me. I was wrapped up tight, and if you've ever heard the refrain that spider's silk is stronger than steel and doubted it, well, trust me, it's true. A few thin threads doesn't give you a proper sense of it. But I was wrapped in what must have been a half-inch of the stuff, and I felt like I was wearing 10 layers of lycra that was too small, There was a tiny bit of give, enough to let me move fingers or toes, or even bend a knee just a fraction. But that was it. It was horrifying. I'm not exactly claustrophobic either, for what it's worth. But given the circumstances, I found myself panicking as I tried to get some purchase. I kept thinking if I could get a finger hooked into it, then maybe I could start tearing away. I was desperate, but the more I fought, the more I realized it was hopeless. The silk was elastic and strong, and covered in a thick, stodgy glue that only further limited my movement as everything I did spread it around until it was gumming my legs and hands together. Wasn't until exhaustion caught up to me, and I was forced to take a short break, that I realized I wasn't alone. There was another cocoon beside me. My neighbor had been a big man in life, podgy, with a large pot belly and a head like a thumb. But in the dim light of that room, he looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin that had been found half decayed in an ancient and forgotten tomb. So thin and desiccated, you could hook a finger under the tendons in his neck and jaws. I nearly cried when I realized I'd risked everything to save a dead man, but that wasn't actually true. The error in my thinking became apparent when he opened his eyes and glared at me with pure, unbridled terror. He opened his mouth, and I was convinced he was about to scream, when instead he coughed and gagged, and something wet and brown dribbled out of his mouth. It flopped down his chin and came to rest on the floor between us. It resembled a hairband, encased in bile and vomit, and I was momentarily stumped until I saw a thin brown leg unfurl from the tangled mess. It's okay. My neighbor's entire body relaxed, his eyes vacant and confused, as Lily knelt down beside me and stroked my head. "Lily, you've got to get me." "Shh," she said, pressing a single finger to my lips. "It's okay. It's going to be okay." Behind her, a shadow appeared. It had legs as thick as my wrist, and they reached from the floor to the ceiling. "It won't be much longer now," she added as the darkness behind her grew. "Probably best to just keep you here." "Lily, what the fuck?" "I told you they'd get bigger," she said, nodding towards the spider my neighbor had just spat onto the floor. "He won't be any real help." She touched my neighbor's head, but he barely responded. He just gazed vacantly as she rolled him over so that he was facing away from me. "For such a clever animal," she added as she parted his hair, "I'm always curious about just how much you miss." Something was clamped around the back of his head, a throbbing bulb of mottled brown skin and hair. It looked like a spider without legs. A tick, maybe. That's what I thought it was until my wife ran a finger playfully along its back, and my neighbor let out a gut-wrenching squeal of pain. Slowly, the shape seemed to wriggle and writhe, and a long, thin leg emerged from beneath its body, and I realized I was looking at a spider wrapped tight around his skull, its legs buried beneath the skin and muscle of his scalp. For a moment it playfully curled the leg in the air before returning it to the incision and sliding it back into place, every inch disappearing with a gruesome wet sound. It displaced muscle and hair, and when it came to rest, I realized just how misshapen his skull had become from all those legs wrapped tight around his head. "What the fuck?" I gasped. "Do you ever find it weird that you can't remember what it looked like? The thing that came running out of her hand?" she asked before reaching over to stroke my head. Her hand came away covered in cobwebs. Something about her touch revolted me. It sent strange shivers coursing through my body. A deep, primordial need to get away came over me. That strange revulsion all over again, the same one that had taunted me over and over again over the last few weeks. Without even meaning to, I found myself convulsing and panicking. my body trying to thrash violently, but with every limb constricted by that silk, I could do nothing except writhe around on the floor. I tried with everything I had to move my hands, to get some purchase on the silk, and tear away at it to free myself. But it was no use. I could do nothing except glare at my wife and the enormous shadow behind her, the one that towered above us both, its great legs clustering around the floor and ceiling. At some point, I grabbed onto my trousers and clenched my fist, and felt something small and hard. The lighter. I knew there was great risk in using it, but I had no choice. I managed to worm my hand into my pocket and find it with my fumbling fingers. My wife seemed oddly aware of what I was doing, and she seemed to tilt her head like a curious dog as I clenched my fist around the small object and used every ounce of willpower I had left to fight the violent seizures that racked my body and thumbed the trigger. The web went up in flames immediately. It must have been the glue, but the flames exploded across the silk like they'd been soaked in kerosene before I even realized that it had weakened enough for me to free one arm. The tongues of fire were already spreading across the floor where they found my poor neighbor. The burning sensation that crawled across my legs and chest hurt like nothing I could imagine. But I was finally free. I rolled over and began to push myself up, already desperately patting at my body to try and put out the flames. When I looked around me, my wife and the shape that followed her were gone. For a moment I considered helping my neighbor, but his body thrashed too violently, and although his eyes were wide open, spiders were pouring from his mouth, and I could not summon the courage to take another step towards him. All I could think of was escape. The house was going up like a tinderbox. It wasn't far to the kitchen, but the fire had already beat me there. Smoke billowed upwards, and trapped by the ceiling, started to fill the air with choking soot. The only escape was the back door, and I stumbled towards it, but was stopped at the last moment by the sight of my wife standing there. "You really are such a fascinating speck." I barreled past her, but to my surprise, she offered no resistance. I merely emerged into the open air, my lungs gasping desperately for clean air as I collapsed onto long, unkempt grass. I looked over my shoulder and saw orange tongues of fire were already leaping out of the windows on the upper floor. Left uncontrolled, the fire would rage and consume the entire row of terrace houses. I felt a moment of remorse, but there were already sirens in the distance, so I knew someone had noticed and done the right thing. But it wasn't over. Lily was sitting on the fence. I don't know how she got there, but she looked completely undisturbed. I never once imagined that when that wind blew me into your home, I'd find such an interesting pair of people. She said, "What a fun mind to sink my legs into. I really had no idea what I was going to find." "Let her go," I gasped. "I have," she said with a shrug. "I did. Months ago, as a matter of fact. There were some incompatibilities, and it just made sense to move homes." She pointed at me and smiled. "I've enjoyed living inside your head quite a bit." Struggling to make sense of her words, but still somehow aware of their terrifying implications, I placed one hand on the back of my head and felt it, felt her. The mere touch was enough to fill my mouth with a coppery taste, while my vision blurred at the edges. Something beneath my skin shifted, and I felt a terrible pressure behind my eyes. I had to get rid of her, and I only knew of one: weakness. "Oh well," she said, as she watched me fumble desperately for the lighter. "Not every relationship has to last forever to be meaningful." I lit my hair on fire. My last memories were of heat and a sudden release of pressure. I couldn't possibly describe it to you. Not really. Something slid out of my skull, and Lily waved at me from the fence, before she seemed to blink out of existence, and then nothing, not even darkness. just total absence. I wouldn't regain a sense of self until the hospital several weeks later. There was nothing left of either house, but they did manage to control the fire before it spread to the others. I'm sure there was still some damage, and to this day, I feel guilty about it. I think I was charged with arson. Maybe more. I have vague memories of being wheeled into a courtroom. The doctors have agonized over me for a long time, and one mentioned amateur trepanation. He said I must have practiced it on my wife, at least based on the body they found in my neighbor's house. But I can't really be sure of anything. I am forever dipping in and out of reality. Writing this down has been difficult. I'm not entirely aware where I am right now. One doctor told me I might make some kind of recovery if it was just normal brain damage, but he'd never seen anything like it, so he couldn't be sure. Feels like it's a different doctor every time I see them. Then again, I don't always recognize myself when I look in the mirror. Of course, that could just be the burns. But I reckon even then I still look a fair bit older than I should. There is one orderly who's stuck around long enough to get to know me. He knows me by name, smiles a lot when he sees me, talks to me about all sorts of things. He seems genuinely interested in me and what I remember. I called him in once to get rid of a spider that had spun a web on the window outside, and he did so with a warm smile. I told him I was deathly afraid of them, and he said he already knew that, but I shouldn't worry because he was going to keep an eye on me and make sure nothing bad happened. I'm glad he's around. Ever since he started working here, I haven't seen many of the nasty little things hanging around my room. I guess he's not that bothered by them. At least not if the cobwebs in his hair are anything to go by. Story number 4. I had a dream that I was at an island port, in a little ship, an eerily old one, a schooner with an ivory wheel and a gold-plated figurehead of a church bell. The waves were calm, and I can hear them lap against the side of the seamless wooden hull, causing a timid chime. She is magnificent, and her name was the Grand Duchess. Not a more majestic ship had existed yet when the scarlet morning sun had hit her port side, which with such a fresh veneer nearly reflected it. Not a piece of her could be replaced because she was one of a kind. Silver and ivory lined every inch of her trim, with speckles of gold here and there. With sullen but proud faces, the whole crew was preparing for an odyssey, understanding that it will be long and laborious, as is standard for all bitter farewells. The captain stands stoically at the helm, hand draped on the gilded wheel and carefully eyeing his crew at work in quiet admiration. Gulls hang loosely and lazily in the air, and untied strips of sail sway gently in the breeze. Behind the nearby port gate, many citizens and dock workers alike gather to watch the solemn voyage depart, if only briefly, only to lose interest and meander away. I've had this dream many times. It only began after I saw her portrait. The borders are made with mahogany and silver so masterfully constructed that at first glance may have looked like it had been put there merely minutes earlier, if there wasn't a date fastened to it. A metal tag made of engraved gold with the words, "Final Godbies of the Grand Duchess, 1/19/1810, nailed tightly to the wall nearby. She is an exact replica of my dreams. Gorgeous strokes of oil paint wash the canvas with deliberate movement that expresses, no doubt, bringing life into the art itself. The details on every inch are so fine, it might have been mistaken for a photograph now and again. Simply the pride of owning such a masterpiece meant that I had to bring her to an exhibition. Not all who saw the portrait understood the engraving, but those who did couldn't help but quietly weep. Some have compared witnessing the portrait to watching ones you love march to the gallows. This and more are why I refuse to display her at all now. It was trouble enough that it gave me vivid daydreams and terrible nightmares. But the fact that she captivated so many others in such a manner could become perilous. It was my burden alone. But I couldn't help but feel so selfish. Who am I to covet such an amazing peace? Was it I who was ordained by the Lord? Or did I simply ordain myself with the unstoppable power of arrogance? I fooled myself into believing I was the only one who could have her. My realization struck me with force. It needed to be destroyed. The spell that she put on all who set eyes upon her worried me more than anything after countless, sleepless nights. I can hear the waves rolling just above my head. Every night they start the same calm, barely audible splat, splat, splat. The creaking of the hull will rises as the waves grew more treacherous, turning from light rapping into scores of angry fists, beating each side of the ship, filled with unholy malice. The room would swell with the putrid stench of salt water and dried chum, pounding my head and crusting my lungs. As she makes her crescendo, I sway and shake, and the room cracks and warps until finally the figurehead rings. A warning for a rogue wave comes all too late, and a heavy crash brings me back to my sweat-covered bed. The Grand Duchess forever sleeps at the bottom of the ocean. All her crew, all her passengers, and all her cargo would never arrive. Was that my ordination? To live out her tragedy night after night? I can't and I won't, but she's calling for me now. I had a dream that I was on the open ocean. I was drifting face down, too terrified to open my eyes. I didn't need to see her. I could feel her. She was warm like a fresh summer tide and comforting like a mother's hug. Her eyes pierced mine. When I open my eyes, I see nothing but the black abyss. No ocean floor, no schools of fish. Pure, absolute, infinite nothing. She called and I answered, but now she wants too much. When you find what remains of me, and you find this letter, do what must be done, and do what I ask. Nothing of me must remain. Nothing of the house must remain. Certainly nothing of her. She's calling out to me again. Story number 5. I'm sitting on a sofa in a cramped, messy room. The carpet is faded and stained, the wallpaper peeling, and spots of mold speckle the ceiling. Everything about this old house screams disrepair. Next to me on the sofa, an old man with sagging, papery skin sits staring at an empty chair in the corner. A younger man, somewhere in his 30s, in a suit with the slick haircut and white smile of a dentist, or maybe a realtor, flashes his pearly whites at the old man and says, "Hello, sir, my name is Nathan. I'm a spiritual medium. Your family reached out to me and asked for my services. Can you tell me some of what you've been experiencing?" "She's there," growls the old man, still staring at the empty chair in the corner. "Who's there?" Nathan, the medium, glances at the chair, back to the old man. "Who is it you see sitting in that chair?" He sniffs, wrinkles up his mouth in a frown. "Dunno her name. For the record, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I am here because I don't believe. I'm also recording this entire interaction. The old man, the medium, the invisible. Woman in the chair in the corner. I make sure to get the chair. Lots of footage of it. I am tempted to get up and go sit in it, but that would ruin this whole charade, wouldn't it? Anyway, I just keep filming." Nathan, the smarmy medium who should be a realtor, looked confused when he first looked at the empty chair, but is now playing along, full woo-woo psychic mode, saying stuff like, "To the woman in the chair, can I ask what you are doing here? What is it you would like to communicate?" Silence. And Nathan asks the old man, "Do you see any change in her?" The old man shakes his head. "She's just sitting there. A few minutes more of a lot of nothing. The medium decides to cast a blessing on the room to help put her spirit to rest. And then the old man sits up straight. His eyes go big. He says, "She's getting up." Then, "She's laughing. She's cursing at us." Then he starts whimpering. "She's coming closer. She's coming. She's coming. Stop her." He starts screaming, and the medium leaps up, chanting words of a prayer in what is probably Google-translated Latin. He waves a hunk of burning sage and sprinkles salt, while the old man screams. I get the whole thing on my phone. The screaming, the sage, the sweat on Nathan, the medium's brow, as he shouts with increasing ferocity over the old man's howls, snarling at the empty chair. And when the moment is right, I yell, "Cut!" The old man stops screaming. His face breaks into a grin as he turns to me. "How was that, Max?" "Brilliant, Pete. You were brilliant," I say, angling my phone toward myself and also speaking to the cameras we have set up to catch the psychic at work. I speak to my future audience, you all, who should subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. This is Pete, an actor. I'm Max, host of Debauchery and Debunkery, where we used to take a shot for each lie, but quickly realized we get drunk way too fast. Now we just debunk stuff and get drunk later while laughing about it. The only person who is not an actor here is Nathan the medium, who, as you can see, quickly began speaking to an empty chair. Nathan, you stated several times that you could sense the presence in the chair. What do you have to say now that you know Pete, here, is an actor? Nathan has lost his charm. He stammers, red-faced, furious at having been set up, looking between me and Pete and the chair, as if unsure which of us is the most to blame for his predicament. He insists his powers are genuine, and babbles that there is a spiritual energy in the chair, while I go on to remark about how the chair itself is from Target. We bought it this morning. So was there spiritual energy at the department store before we brought it in. He says it must be with the house then. I tell him how the house itself is a set. It's actually my house, and I live here, and this entry room doesn't usually look like this. We made it grubbier for effect. Though, I add, I guess you're right. There's not the greatest vibes. Feng Shui has always been a little off in here. And I do need to replace the carpet. The stains are real. The mold spots on the ceiling are fake. You get the idea. Call me Max, short for Maxine, or Maximilian, depending on my mood. I'm currently Nathan the medium's worst nightmare. "What you are doing is entrapment," he snarls, his ruddy red face on the verge of tears. Oh, his business is gonna take a hit, all right. He keeps barking at me. "You act so sanctimonious, but this bullshit is hurting people. You're hurting people by dismissing their beliefs, disrespecting the spiritual." I laugh at him. "I'd say that's exactly what you're doing by taking advantage of people, just like you tried with Pete here. I bet you go into schools and debunk Santa Claus to the little kids. How telling that you compare what you do to lying to children. So you know you're lying. You just think it's okay because they're feel-good lies. You know what? Make fun all you want, but this stuff is real. You're a fool to mess with it." He turns and storms out. My last shot of him is both middle fingers held up. His dramatic exit is marred almost immediately by his return moments. Later, his face now blank, as thrusts a business card into my hand. "For skeptics," he says, "call her, and she'll make you believe." Thanks for the tip, Nathan. Probably won't, though. It usually doesn't work when people know ahead of time. "Call her. She will make you believe," he repeats again, before turning on his heel and striding out. I look at the card. It just says, "Make believe" on one side, and on the other is an eye and a number. The eye has a nifty effect where it appears to always be looking at you. The card is matte black with simple lettering. I tuck it in my pocket. A few days later, Nathan, the medium, contacts me via text. The episode has already aired. I'm sure Nathan is pissed about it. No doubt he's getting a lot of emails and calls. He's getting roasted in the comments. So he's messaging me. It's not surprising. Probably to beg me to remove it, offer to bribe me. I've had all kinds of things. His message, when I open it, surprises me. Forget what I said about the card. Just throw it away, please. Now, I've always been a contrarian. Had forgotten about the card until that moment. But of course, after his request, I go digging it up. The matty black, the eye, the words, make believe, and the number to call. I call it, out of curiosity, making sure to record the call so I'll have material later for an episode if this turns into anything. There's no ringing, just a voice connecting almost immediately. The address is 112244. Come if you want to believe. Corny. Probably not worth the effort of a debunk, but the address isn't too far from my sister's house and I have to visit her anyway, to help her with a few things and talk about my brother-in-law. He's battling cancer. I make a note about it, and the next day, before I head over to see my sister, I swing by the address. It takes a while to find. A small psychic reading shop, more of a nook, really, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. You have to go down a set of stairs to even find the door, and the room is so small it feels like stepping into a janitor's closet. The woman inside is neither old nor young. She's somewhere between 30 and 50, an unremarkable bird of a woman with beady dark eyes and hair like a crow's wings, glossy black with a bluish sheen. Must be dyed. She's sitting in a chair in the corner, in a long black gown, stiff as a doll that's been posed. She has only one eye, which follows me as I step in and sit down in the chair opposite her. The other eye is shrouded in shadow. Also, the lights in here are very low. It's a nice effect. Hokey, but visually arresting. Props to her for atmosphere, minus a few points for being so cliché. "Hello, Max," says the woman. So Nathan obviously did give her the heads up. So much for debunking. Even so, I ask her if I can record. She cackles a little and motions for me to go ahead. So I take out my phone and start recording us both. Though I don't have much hope for anything from this given she's already been prepped for me by Nathan. Still, why not? I clear my throat and say, "I'm told you can make anyone believe." "Sure," she agrees. "Okay, make me believe." Her head cocks, raven-like, and she examines me. Her eye drifts to the camera. "Is this really what you want, Max? To be made to believe?" Me and my viewers, and your viewers. Again, that throaty chuckle. How nice. All right then. Max, the debunker. I'll make a bargain with you. In 5 days, if I've made you believe, you publicly announce your belief before you end yourself and your channel. If you still don't believe in 5 days, nothing happens to you. The sheer gall of this lunatic. I can't help smiling. End myself and my channel? I echo. That's the worst bargain I've ever heard. Why would I agree to that? Because you don't believe you won't believe, and you're an arrogant shit who wants clicks, and making this bargain will give them to you. She makes, actually, a very good point. Also, she's right. I absolutely do not believe. I say as much to my camera, and then say, "Okay, crazy lady, fine. I accept your bargain, but just recording this to note that I have no plans to commit suicide, and if I appear to do so, and this lady has murdered me, I expect her to be arrested." She just looks at me with that flat black eye. "So how are you going to make me believe?" I ask. "Tell me the names of 3 people. She grunts. "Kenji," I say. "My brother-in-law." He dies on Friday, she says. Loses his battle with cancer. My condolences. Wow. Okay, this is obviously you did your research. It's called a hot reading, when a purported psychic will look up information about a subject before the reading and then recite facts about them that seem astonishing to the audience. Nathan told her I was coming, so she obviously looked up my brother-in-law and his condition. My brother-in-law could pass at any time. Friday is very specific, but it's not a bad gamble. I find it in poor taste she throws out his death so casually, though, wagering her whole charade on his ill health. That one's too easy, she says, as if agreeing with my thoughts. Who else? Sarah, my sister, who is going through it right now with Kenji's illness. She shakes her head. Nothing much happens to her in the next 5 days except for grieving her husband. Name someone else. What? No. You said I can name anybody. I named Sarah. You can't make a prediction for her. She sighs and rolls her eyes. It's your episode, Max. There are plenty of more interesting options. But fine. Your sister Sarah forgets a bag of groceries and has to go back for it. Inside are 2 apples, some herbal medicine your brother-in-law requested that she'll never get a chance to deliver to him, and chocolates for you. This is all so specific. Already, I'm thinking of how it could be staged. Could this woman bribe one of the store workers at the co-op my sister shops at? Or maybe this make-believe woman has got a bug in her ear now. Someone is whispering stuff to her, and they've been watching Sarah, and the shopping has already happened. I'm still considering how elaborate this might be. Or if she's just doing what most of these scammers do. Lie. The woman says, I'll pick the third person because you're about to say Mateo, and yes, his wife is cheating on him. You'll say it's too easy for me to have guessed. You think I have an accomplice listening and feeding me clues. So instead, let's pick Pete. In 3 days, he has a heart attack. From seeing her. Seeing who? The woman in the chair. Her lips curve in a ghastly smile. Pete, the actor. There's no woman in any chair. I paid him to make her up. He'll call you in 3 days and he'll tell you he's been seeing her. He'll beg you to make her go away. He'll warn you. He'll plead. He's an actor. I snap. Did you hire him? He'll say that he knew you'd say that. He'll beg you to believe him. But you won't. Well, this last one sounds easy enough to stage, anyway. Though if they can make the stuff happen with my sister, I'll be both really impressed and probably filing a lawsuit for stalking. As for my brother-in-law, it's disgusting they'd even talk about him that way. Oh, Max, she says as I am leaving. Take my card. I love referrals. Refer me to someone else and maybe I'll make them believe in your place. Whatever. I growl and step out of the place, ascending the stairs into the bright sun. She makes my skin crawl, not because she's connected to the occult, but because she's a charlatan who lies without any sense of moral compunction, a parasite feeding on people's superstitions. I've made it my career to expose people like her. These kinds of scammers are the reason my father ended up losing so much money, destitute, and desperately believing that the woman, if she even was a woman, catfishing him, was in love with him. He believed she was planning to elope with him until he succumbed to COVID during the pandemic. Exposing the lies can't bring him back or undo the harm that was caused to our family, but it might prevent someone else from falling for a similar scheme. When I get home, I review the footage of my encounter with the make-believe woman and decide that next week I'll splice it with some footage of all her predictions not coming true. It'll make a decent short reel, I guess, though not dissimilar from other reels where I've exposed frauds. I save the footage and forget about it. 2 days later on Friday, My brother-in-law's passing coincides with the first prediction, but his death was already foretold by the doctors, and I dismiss the coincidence. For the rest of the day, I am talking to family. I console my sister, Sarah. I spend the night and check in on her every few hours. She has barely stopped crying and hasn't eaten anything. The next day, I'm still trying to console her when my phone rings. It's from an unsaved number. I don't pick up, but it rings, and she tells me through tears it's fine, to please go and answer it. So I do. It is Pete, the actor. Max, rasps Pete. Max, thank God. She said she'll count you as a referral. You have to make her go away. Who? I ask. Annoyance like an ice pick in my brain, because I already know who. Already. Suspect. The woman. He bursts, all but sobbing. The one in the chair? I can't believe it. This make-believe lady actually did it. She actually reached out to Pete, paid him whatever she paid him. Not much, probably. He's an amateur actor we found on Instagram. Honestly, one of the reasons we hired him is because he came cheap. And now he's turned his shtick on me. I sigh. Yeah, very. Funny. Listen, I know who hired you. She said you'd say that. He bursts. She said you wouldn't believe me, but you have to. Max, you have to. Okay, look, this is inappropriate. My brother-in-law just died. I need to take care of family matters. You have to believe. Max, you're the only one who can. Oh, save me. You have to believe before tonight. Call her and tell her you believe, or I hang up the phone, frustrated, and then I silence it as it immediately rings again. My sister looks up from her chair, eyes red, perplexed. Max? She asks. Who was? Nobody. Just an actor I worked with on a gig. Nothing to worry about. I sigh, looking at my silenced phone. It's still ringing. There are also pictures coming through via text and messages. Pictures from the photo shoot. All of the empty chair. Can't you see her? He keeps texting. More empty chair pictures. The man is dedicated, I'll give him that. He's a much better actor than I initially gave him credit. Probably should have paid him more. I block his number and forget about him. Forget about him, that is, until the next day. I'm helping my sister to put things away around the house. The place is a mess, and everything reminds her of Kenji. As I unpack a tote bag on the counter, I pull out a couple of chocolate bars. I ask if I can have one, and she calls from her place, listless on the couch. Yeah, I got those for you. Oh, really? Thank you. Sure. I pull a box of an herbal supplement out. My heart thumps in my chest. This is only a coincidence, I think. I clear my throat and call. What do you want me to do with this herbal concoction? Huh? Supplements for... Looks like it helps with digestion and gut health. Oh, She goes very quiet, and then says, I got that for Kenji. I don't know. Oh, I don't want to ask. I don't want to, and I loathe the butterflies in my stomach, the way my throat is dry and constricted as I ask her, did you forget the bag? Huh? The herbal medicine. When you were out shopping for him, did you leave the bag? Yeah, actually. She wipes tears from her eyes. I've just been so out of it. How did you know I left it? I don't answer. My heart is hammering now as I go to my phone, search for Pete's number, try to call, but there is no answer. I turn to my sister. Maybe the cashier kept the bag by accident, I say. Maybe they set it behind the counter so you didn't. Notice when you walked away. She's too distraught over Kenji to engage with me. Doesn't understand why I care about the bag. Could have been tucked behind the counter, she echoes. I cling to that thought. The make-believe woman bribed the cashier to hide the bag, and then to put items in it that my sister would normally buy. How else would the make-believe woman have known exactly what items would be in there? These scammers, I tell you, blood-sucking. It's insane the lengths they go to. But just in case, I retreat to the spare room, open my laptop, and check the footage of my recording with the make-believe woman. Check the date. She told me I had 5 days. Tomorrow will be 5. I have time. I have time. I repeat to myself, wondering why I'm being so uncharacteristically irrational when none of this is real. I paid Pete. I know he's acting. Why the fuck hasn't he called back? I call again. No answer. I go to YouTube and pull up the debauchery and debunkery video I released about Nathan the phony medium. My heart settles as I watch it. The medium talking about his craft. This fucking fraudster. He goes on about establishing a psychic connection and how time is all wibbly-wobbly. Pretty sure he cribbed that from some sci-fi show. And as a consequence, he can see snippets from the future. It's all nonsense. I feel the comfort of the familiar, my skepticism sliding back into place. The camera shots of my house, the staged front room, the peeling wallpaper and everything. And there's Pete, sitting on the sofa, pretending. I can't wait for him to get to the part where I call, "Cut." And he reveals he's acting the whole time. That's what I need to see, to feel better. "Hello, sir. My name is Nathan," says Nathan on screen, introducing himself to Pete. "I'm a spiritual medium. Your family reached out to me and asked for my services. Can you tell me some of what you've been experiencing?" "She's there," says Pete. "Who's there?" asks Nathan the medium, while Pete the actor keeps staring and says he doesn't know her name. And then my camera, zooming in on the chair. "No fuck Menno." I freeze the frame. No, what the fuck? No, she's there, staring out at me from the screen. Staring through the screen, right at the camera. The woman from the psychic reading shop. The video proceeds as normal, the same as before, exactly as we recorded. My blood is pumping so loud I can barely hear myself think, my pulse raging, drowning out the dialogue in the video as the medium leans forward and asks what the woman is doing now. Pete says she's just sitting there. The camera pans back to the empty chair, but it's not empty. The woman is sitting in it. The camera returns to Nathan the medium as he gets up and begins performing a blessing on the room until suddenly Pete sits up straight on the sofa and announces, "She's getting up. She's laughing." My throat constricts. My heart sledgehammers my ribs so hard, I think I might go into cardiac arrest. The phone camera remains trained on Pete, on his hammy acting. Only now, instead of looking hammy, he looks genuinely terrified. He really is a better actor than I gave him credit. I hear my own voice chuckling under my breath on the recording, trying not to giggle at what I evidently thought was a great performance by our actor. And then finally, my phone pans back to the chair. I scream aloud, in my room by myself, and jerk back from my laptop. The woman is standing, lurching toward the camera, toward me. She's coming closer. Pete's voice screams on the recording. I'm cowering on the floor, gasping, as the woman steps nearer, nearer to the camera, her face swallowing the screen. "Cut!" shouts my voice. Then everything is back to normal. The woman on the video is gone. There's only Nathan, red-faced and ashamed as Pete and I tease him. I hear my own arrogant voice. "I'm Max, host of Debauchery and Debunkery, where we used to take a shot for each lie, but quickly realized we get drunk way too fast." I slam my hand on the laptop to shut it, but then something occurs to me. If the woman was really there, if I wasn't seeing things, others must have noticed her too. I pull open the laptop again and skim the YouTube comments. All ordinary, and my heartbeat settles until I scroll to the most recent comments. Specifically, there's a bunch left, by the user Pete Hamsitup. It's the handle for our actor, and he has commented over and over, Pete Hamsitup, I believe, Pete Hamsitup, I believe Pete Hamsitup, I believe Pete Hamsitup, I believe Pete Hamsitup, I believe... I check Pete's Instagram account, the one we hired him from. His account is gone. Deleted. Call Pete, and while the phone rings, Max? The door bursts open, and my sister says, Max, everything okay? She's come because she heard me screaming over the video. Can you see her? I ask, trying not to hyperventilate as I turn my laptop toward her, rewinding the video to just before the cut. Can you see anyone in the chair? What? No, it's just an empty chair. Max, what's going on? But I push past her without answering. I need to get home. Need to get to that staged front room. Max, my sister shouts as I slam the door behind me. I try calling Pete again as I pull out of the driveway. His phone just keeps ringing. I call and call, then drop the phone, swearing as I nearly pancake a pedestrian. I'm so distraught. The pedestrian screams obscenities as I screech by. My phone rings again, and I pick it up wildly, wondering if it's Pete, but it's my sister, worried about me. I lie that I'm fine, running a red light and careening along residential streets, and finally screeching into my driveway. And I leap out, rushing up the front steps, through the porch and into the staged living room area. See the chair, still empty, thank God. Everything's still the same as on the day of Nathan the medium's visit. Nathan, I need to call Nathan. Nathan, I burst as the call connects. It's Max from Debauchery and Debunkery. I need you to make her stop. I pause, stammering over my next words, and grit my teeth and make myself say, I'll take down the debunk video. I'll say you were right. Just make her stop. Do you believe? Comes the tinny voice on the phone. Sure, fine. Just make her stop. If you believe, says the voice, you must publicly announce your belief before you end yourself and your channel. What? The blood in my veins turns to ice as I remember the deal. That absurd deal. If I believe, I end my channel and myself. If I don't believe, nothing happens. So Max, you'll be fine if you don't believe, says the small, rational voice in my head. If I don't believe, as long as I'm still a skeptic, But tears start into my eyes, the phone shaking in my fingers because I'm looking at my texts, and there's a new one from Pete. Hello, this is Jay, on my grandfather's phone. He had a heart attack yesterday and passed away. Scrolling up to the previous texts, it's just the picture he sent over and over again of the chair. But now, I see her. I fucking see her. And now I can't make myself unsee her. I can't. And I'm certain that when finally I see her in the flesh again, and my 5 days are over, I'll end my account, and myself. And oh fuck me, how do I stop it? Please help me. I whimper into the phone. Nathan's voice cackles, only it doesn't sound like Nathan. I sink down to the floor in despair, and that's when I find it on the carpet, that matte black card of hers, black like the blackest, void in the universe, except those words make believe, and the picture of the eye looking at me, and the number. And I remember, she likes referrals. I still have a few hours left to find someone else. So I'm making this final post. Please, are you a skeptic? You think I'm making this all up? That it's just nonsense? That I'm a ha 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 ha. I'm an actor. Ha 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 ha. Perfect. Okay, please. Listen, I believe, and I need you to look her up. I need you to call her. Call this number, 123456. Call her, and no matter how skeptical you are, she'll make you believe. But I beg you to do it soon. Now. Call her now. I promise she'll make you believe.